of you to the ICWA book discussion event today. Let me first acknowledge that the panel which we had today here is most distinguished panel for any book discussion on China and BRI. The program has already been circulated. The chair and the panelists do not really need any introduction for us all. We also appreciate the presence of Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, former DG of ICWA. Before handing over to the chair, may I invite Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Director General ICWA, to kindly deliver her opening remarks. Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon and namaskar. Ambassador Ashok Kantha, Lieutenant General Narasimhan, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor Chaulia, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, and all who are present here, a warm welcome for this meeting where we are going to be discussing the book, the in-house book of ICWA, China's BRI in different regions of the world, cooperation, contradictions and concerns. Now, this is a book which has been edited by Dr. Sanjeev Kumar, but the contributions have been by all the faculty, research faculty of ICWA in putting together this work. Now, the BRI, we undertook this book because BRI projects provided a valuable insight into in the context of China, understanding China's behavior, its expanding global footprint, and the functioning of, if one could call it, the Chinese state, because the projects which they undertook, the manner in which they undertook, all that showed, in a way, the mindset of China. Now, the book, of course, looks at the BRI project as it completes 10 years since its launch. It looks at it in terms of the conception of the BRI, its implementation, and the implications that it has in different regions and different countries. They vary somewhat, but broadly you can see that the project is now, project is a strategic project of China, and now several partner countries of China are beginning to understand this, which was not the case when it was launched. Secondly, you also see that as it enters the second stage, China itself is looking at and reassessing BRI. And you are seeing that it is considering renegotiations, it is downsizing, and in some areas it's even moving out of projects which were in BRI, especially in South Asia, Southeast Asia. You're seeing that trend. So now, with that happening, there is on the other side the fear of debt trap among other countries, some of the countries, and that is resulting in when the negotiations take place on BRI projects. Now, I think both sides, there's a greater amount of rigorous negotiations as compared to the earlier stages when there was not that kind of an approach to BRI projects. And you also, there is a recognition as we go through the book and putting it together that the power dynamics of the different regions are different, hence the reaction also is different. Also at the same time, as a part of as it enters the second decade of BRI, you saw that in September 2021, China launched the Global Development Initiative, and then it followed it up with the announcement of the Global Security Initiative in April 2022. Now, the Global Development Initiative in particular is somewhat being looked at as an expansion of BRI, or maybe one could call it a booster dose of BRI. So therefore, looking at these two initiatives also would be interesting to see them in the context of BRI. As far as India is concerned, naturally for us, from our perspective, it would be useful to understand this major initiative of our largest neighbor, if you might call it, and the impact that would have on the geopolitics as well as on the economic opportunities for us. So, as far as we are concerned, we have had a very consistent position on connectivity projects in the sense that all connectivity projects should adhere to international norms and must respect sovereignty and territorial integrity, and also that they should follow the principles of openness, transparency, and fiscal accountability. So broadly, this has been our position on BRI projects, and we do feel that these elements are lacking in the BRI, considerably lacking in BRI projects. So we do, as you look at this book, we think it adds value. It adds value to an understanding of China. It would be useful even for scholars, not only in India, but even beyond India, because it brings together information which probably not so easily available. So broadly, we look forward to the book discussion today, which is taking place just ahead of the 20th National Congress and an event which is being watched very closely globally. So with these words, we look forward to discussion, and Ambassador Ashok Kantha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vijay. First of all, thanks for inviting me to chair this very important book discussion and for making some very important observations. In fact, you have flagged all the key issues relating to BRI that we need to discuss and explore, and which have been handled in this book. As Sanjeev mentioned, we have a very distinguished panel today. General Narasimhan, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor Sreeram Chaulia. So I'm really privileged to chair this panel. On the book, as Director General pointed out, it's a book which puts together various perspectives relating to BRI at a time when we are reaching close to first decade of launch of this mega initiative of President Xi Jinping. I think it's a comprehensive treatment of the subject, but the real strength of the book lies in looking at rolling out of BRI from various regional perspectives and putting together the relevant inputs and assessments, while at the same time providing an overview of the nature of BRI, its contradictions, its challenges, and possibly the likely trajectory of this initiative. I do believe that it will be an essential reference material for studying BRI both in India and abroad. Let me share with you some observations on BRI based partly on my own association with this project during its formative years, and more importantly, insights I have gleaned while going through this book. BRI was launched first in September 2013 when Xi Jinping was visiting Kazakhstan. And then subsequently, the maritime version was unveiled during his visit to Indonesia. I reached China as ambassador in January 2014. And at that time, contours of One Belt, One Road, as BRI was known at that point of time, were still unclear. Details very sketchy, but discussions we had with our Chinese interlocutors, 2 points came across very clearly. One, that it is personal initiative of Xi Jinping. In fact, some of our senior interlocutors told us that they themselves don't know, full content of BRI because it has come right from top. And secondly, it's going to be a mega project. It's a signature initiative of Xi Jinping, which is going to be transformational in character, even though at that time they were not clear about contents. As this book very rightly brings out, BRI has a number of pragmatic drivers linked to China's connectivity agenda that DG referred to, its quest for new growth engines for its slowing economy. Already by 2012, economy started slowing down in China. Utilization of surplus capacity, development to new markets as the country moves up the value chain, more, you know, gainful deployment of China's huge, foreign exchange reserves, which had reached nearly $4 trillion one point of time. Internationalization of renminbi, reduction of regional disparities, something which has been brought out in Sanjeev's introduction and also in the epilogue. And desire to develop and stabilize Western regions. These are all, very valid considerations. But at the same time, one aspect which Chinese downplayed initial years, as DG also mentioned, that is the geostrategic dimension of BRI. But beginning the vision document which came out in 2015, I think that aspect started sort of creeping up in our consciousness. So we should have no doubt about the fact that BRI is above all a geostrategic initiative by China, which is aimed at shaping its periphery and carving out a maritime come a continental domain with China as the central player. I think this basic objective of BRI should not be lost sight of. And it is an instrument for China to achieve its geopolitical objectives by binding other countries more closely to its own growth story. And then, as you know, Xi Jinping, soon after he took over as General Secretary of the party, he talked about the Chinese dream of great rejuvenation of Chinese nation. And, basic thrust here is, restoring, quote unquote, China's quote unquote rightful role as in the Committee of Nations and its leadership position. And BRI seeks to do that. It's the vehicle for moving towards that objective. And it also boosts China's centrality in the network which it's seeking to develop. That's the first point I wanted to make. Second point, let me briefly dwell upon India's position on BRI. Contrary to perceptions which are widely shared, we approached BRI with a fairly open mind to begin with. In fact, I recall a visit of then External Affairs Minister Mrs. Sushma Swaraj to China in February 2015, when Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave a detailed briefing for the first time and sought our support. And EM made it very clear that there's no way we can endorse BRI, which is a Chinese initiative. It is not a multilateral initiative. But let's explore what are the areas we can work together where we have common interests. And this approach of very pragmatic approach of exploring convergent interests led to India joining Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. I think this point is also made in the book. AIIB was originally conceived as part of OBOR, One Belt, One Road, but later, partly as a result of discussions with us, they stopped projecting AIIB as part of the BRI project. When we had discussions, I recall my own discussions with Chin Liu-chun, who was then, heading the secretariat for AIIB and is now the president. The first question we asked them, is it going to be a Chinese project or a multilateral initiative? And they went out of the way to assure us that it will be a multilateral initiative and they will take on board our concerns and requirements, which they did actually. And when the statute was formulated, many of our requirements were taken on board. India became the second largest stakeholder. Someone nominated by us became, the chief financial officer. And India is one of the main beneficiaries in terms of loan dispersal. But this approach which was pragmatic, based on convergent interests, based on a multilateral approach, was completely missing when it comes to broader BRI construct. In fact, as BRI gained momentum, China lost all interest in pursuing multilateral solutions based on convergent interests. Possibly because it's the underpinning of BRI was geopolitical in character. It was not really seeking public goods for international community. It showed absolutely no interest in accommodating concerns and interests, and it came out most clearly later in 2015, when during President Xi Jinping's visit to Pakistan, they formally launched China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, despite our protestations. And we came out very clearly that this infringes upon our sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we have other problems with BRI. So as the nature of BRI became clearer, we also shed our studied ambivalence and adopted a more negative stance on BRI. And DG has already referred to our position on BRI, which was articulated very forcefully in May 2017, just on the eve of first Belt and Road Forum, which we decided not to participate. We were at that time sort of outlier because most of other countries were supportive, including USA. USA participated in first Belt and Road Forum, but we took certain position which has become mainstream position now. The concerns we had expressed at that point of time are very widely shared today among many of our partner countries. Now, along with this, better understanding of BRI, a greater pushback has developed against BRI in many countries, as this book brings out in considerable detail. As there is, greater clarity regarding nature of BRI and China's regional global ambitions, concerns about both BRI and China's aggressive, external behavior have also sort of crystallized. And since first Belt and Road Forum, domestic and international opposition to the initiative has mounted, and several governments which were initially enthusiastic about Chinese investment have faced a popular backlash to the adverse terms of loan, lack of transparency, environmental concerns, and very credible reports about corruption. The BRI has received criticism for lending heavily to several countries, including Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Laos, the Maldives, and others, which are not in a position to repay the debt they're incurring. The forced lease of 99-year-old lease of Hambantota port to Chinese entities in 2017 was a cautionary tale. And in fact, it did a lot to change perceptions about BRI and, create this rather credible perception that there is a debt trap diplomacy involved there. And I'll go on to suggest that what's happening in Sri Lanka today, Sri Lanka's current economic predicament, and the fact that Sri Lanka, the loans Sri Lanka had taken from China for unviable projects have partly, contributed. The debt-fueled development strategy of Mahinda Rajapaksa and successors have contributed to Sri Lanka's current problem. And Sri Lanka is not alone. In fact, over the last decade, as documented in this publication, China has handed out about $1 trillion in loans and other funds for projects in almost 150 countries. Aid data's analysis shows that for every dollar of aid given by China, there's $9 of loans, debt given by China. So this is kind of mismatch which is there. Nearly 60% of China's overseas loans are now held by countries considered to be in financial distress, and the corresponding figure in 2010 was only 5%. China today has become the largest, provider of, debt globally. Now, a related point is that China today is on the cusp of facing a spate of debt defaults by borrower countries. A number of reasons, including COVID and Ukraine war, slowing global economy, combined with rising interest rate and higher inflation, have left the borrower countries ill placed to repay China's loan. So China is being forced to move out of its comfort zone of sort of refinancing debt to restructuring of debts, something which had not accepted in the past. Now, there is a case of Zambia where this is panning out, where China has agreed to a common framework where China and France they are co-chairing the empowered group, and this is just a precursor to shape of things to come. I suspect something similar will happen in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, where China will have to take a haircut or take a loss on its debt portfolio through debt restructuring. Now, another related point is that while there is greater questioning of BRI externally, China's domestic capacity to sustain ambitious projects externally is getting reduced as it is moving towards a lower growth rate trajectory. This year, the GDP growth of China will be in the neighborhood of 3%, and a lot of analysts are suggesting that this is the new normal, that they will maintain this kind of growth rate. They will not be able to go back to a higher growth rate. And there's also domestic criticism of China's wasteful spending on overstretch under the rubric of BRI, and China's zero COVID policy further aggravated the situation. Now, another point which has been made in this book that since 2018, when BRI loan disbursals peaked, there has been a marked decline. In 2020, there was a 58% contraction in loans compared to the peak of 2018. And while data for 2021-2022 is still anecdotal, this trend of a lower level of dispersals appears to has continued. Even for CPEC, which is the flagship project of BRI, loan dispersals have been scaled down very significantly in recent years. So actually, BRI, as DG pointed out, is going through a course correction, particularly since the second Belt and Road Forum. Chinese authorities are now insisting on much greater scrutiny of projects and their funding, unlike in the past when they were sort of forcing banks to give more loans. At the same time, the final point I wanted to make is that it will be a mistake for us to write off the BRI or even downplay its importance. We have to keep in mind the fact that it's the signature initiative of Xi Jinping, who is the supreme leader of China, is the centerpiece of China's external economic engagement. It's enshrined in the Constitution of the Communist Party of China since 2017, and it lies at the core of the party state's grand strategy. Therefore, leadership jettisoning or abandoning BRI is unlikely. For all its problem, we should also acknowledge that the initiative succeeded in drawing more countries into China's orbit over the past decade, with many recipient countries voting alongside it at the United Nations. This is particularly true of Global South. You just look at the voting on resolution on Xinjiang at the UNHRC. The China managed to beat back the Western initiative. Other thing, in terms of concrete gains, China owns over 100 ports in 63 countries, and many of these can be dual use in character. So this is a fact which is not going to change, even if the scale of BRI is brought down. And then China is adding new dimensions to BRI, digital BRI, health BRI. If you just look at digital BRI, despite all efforts of USA and its partners, Huawei and ZTE, they have a commanding role in Africa, in particular, in digital, telecommunication infrastructure. Overall, the allure of BRI remains significant in the global South, more so when available alternatives have not emerged so far, despite all talk of Build Back Better, etc. BRI remains the main game in town. Therefore, I'll conclude by saying that BRI is likely to remain a major vehicle of Chinese economic outreach and geopolitical strategy, even as it's undergoing course correction and scaling down. And as DG rightly flagged, it's being supplemented by new initiatives, especially global development initiative, which was initiated launched in September last year by Xi Jinping at UNGA, and the global security initiative, which was unveiled by him at POA Forum for Asia in April this year. I think I'll strongly recommend that, as you have done excellent work of BRI, there can be similar in-depth studies, still early days, exploring these two concepts of GDI and GSI. I'll stop here and now invite Sanjeev, editor of the book, to introduce the publication.
Thank you very much, sir, for your comments. I would just like to make 5-6 brief comments. First point is about the conception of the idea for the book length volume at ICWA. I think the Director General was very clear in her mind that the Council needs to do a study and assess progress of China's Belt and Road Initiative in different regions of the world from an Indian perspective. And we are aware that there is hardly any study by Indian experts on BRI covering all relevant regions. So I sincerely thank the Director General for giving me the responsibility to coordinate the book project and edit the volume. I also thank DDG, JS, and DR for their guidance and support. And then, as requested by the Council, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli gave an orientation lecture in February this year on the subject and interacted with the research faculty. The lecture and the interaction was extremely useful, and he highlighted some thrust areas for all of us, which we have included in this book. For those who have not seen or not read the book, let me briefly inform that the book has divided into 6 sections. The first section examines thematic issues, especially China's domestic, economic, maritime, and strategic interest as drivers of China's BRI. This section also includes a chapter on locating BRI within the context of China-US competition. Second section deals with BRI in South Asian countries. Third section deals with BRI in China's neighboring areas, Eurasia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia. Fourth section discusses BRI in Arab world. Fifth discusses Europe, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And the final section deals with BRI and the 2 challenges of our recent times, that is COVID and Ukraine crisis. Now I come to the second point, the title of the book. From the beginning, the main title was final, as the focus was to study China's BRI from a regional perspective. We also included some responses from some important countries who are not part of the Chinese project, like USA, Japan, and South Korea. The subtitle of the book was decided later during the course of the study. Let me briefly explain the three terms which we have used in the subtitle: cooperation, contradictions, and concern. Cooperation has been the main official agenda from Chinese side, and therefore we may not need to explain further here. But contradiction, I would like to mention at least 2-3 contradictions here. The chair referred that the second Belt and Forum was a course correction. The book also agrees with this assessment. And here I would like to refer to Xi Jinping address to the forum, where he stressed that the spirit of multilateralism should be upheld. He also said that we will uphold multilateralism. And we are also aware that in recent times, the Chinese leadership highlighted the term true multilateralism. This is the 10th year of BRI announcement, but it remains essentially a bilaterally negotiated agreements with over 140 countries and does not follow norms and multilateral institutions, including transparency. So this is one of the contradictions the book has highlighted. Various chapters of the book has demonstrated this. Now, the second contradiction, the Chinese discourse highlight BRI as a critical instrument for advancing or building the what they call community of common destiny, which is a political and a strategic concept. And this is, of course, contradictory because the Chinese side, from the beginning, as discussed here also, has highlighted the economic narrative of the BRI, and they tried to conceal the geopolitical dimensions. The book has also referred to a high-level symposium organized by China on BRI and Community of Common Destiny in October 2016, and brings out the constraints of building the Community of Common Destiny as acknowledged by Chinese experts, such as low level of political trust between China and neighboring countries, as well as the boundary disputes with some countries. Further, I would like to here quote or cite Foreign Minister Wang Yi's statement in June this year after the China Central Asia Summit. He talked about deepening security cooperation for jointly building BRI. Now, this could be a contradiction because now it's obvious that they are talking about strengthening security cooperation for building BRI, which was not the initial agenda. This change is much evident, and book has also demonstrated over the years. And that is why I think some experts, when they consider BRI as a first step towards creation of alliances to protect Chinese interests abroad, it is not without a reason. The third term, concerns, I think the DG and chair all have referred to the valid concerns and emerging perceptions from the participating country. Now I come to the third point, and that is about using data in the book. There are variations in estimates about China's direct investment in BRI participating country. The book has highlighted the recent data released by Ministry of Commerce of China. It was released in May 2022. I think in the run-up of 20th Party Congress, they have released several data. So BRI data is also part of that. And this is very interesting because the Chinese data indicates something very important. And this has been issued for the period 2013 to 2021. And as per the data released, China's direct investment in countries along the Belt and Road totaled 161.3 billion. Further, the Chinese enterprises have invested around 43 billion in trade and cooperation zones, economic trade and cooperation zones established in these countries. And they also give data about the trade that the total trade volume between China and BRI countries accounted for 29.7% of China's total foreign trade in, sorry, this was in 2021, and 25%, and the trade was 25% in 2013. So it was just around 4.7% increase. And then on the other hand, the BRI participating countries have also made substantial investment in China. The ministry data informs that the BRI participating countries have invested around 71.2 billion in China. The other important data which they have given that China signed new contracts of around 1.08 trillion during this period, 2013 to 2021, with countries along the Belt and Road for engineering projects in transportation, electricity, and other areas, with 728.6 billion business volume completed. Here, it is noteworthy that the volume of business completed is far bigger than the China's direct investment with countries along the Belt and Road. And the controversy related to Padma Bridge in Bangladesh is a case in point. Bangladesh had to refute the statement of Bangladesh-based Beijing-sponsored organization that Padma Bridge has been constructed as a part of BRI. From Chinese perspective, Padma Bridge is a part of business completed, what they have highlighted in their data, by Chinese companies without making investment. Therefore, some, I think, repeated statement like BRI is $1 trillion investment as may be moderated after consulting the recent Chinese data. Now I come to the fourth point quickly, as it has also been discussed here. The scope of BRI has been widening from economic and energy to include political, socio-cultural, digital, health, education, and security dimensions. The blurring lines between China's economic and strategic ambitions is much evident following the implementation of this project. The fifth point I would like to make is that the implication of BRI for India has been discussed in some chapters and in epilogue. It is noteworthy that South Asia has become the most contested region, as almost all participating countries of the region have witnessed large or small protests against BRI projects. The countries are fearful about that trap, as it has been discussed here, as the case of Sri Lanka is evident for everybody to study. Here I would like to refer, and in the book also it has been referred, the symposium organized by China, the high-level symposium, in October 2016, and there a Sri Lankan scholar said, and I quote, it was held in Beijing, the infrastructure in Sri Lanka supported by China is not transparent and such investment would bring more liabilities rather than FDI. This statement was made in October 2016 when the project was just started. Now, the last point I would like to make that the book has also referred to the recent Chinese initiative, such as Global Development Initiative and GSI, although it has not gone into detail. And I welcome the comments of the chair on the subject. I will support here what Professor Wang Yiwei from Renmin University has highlighted in his writings. And he has highlighted these two concepts as two wings of community of common destiny. And community of common destiny for China is to build a Sinocentric world order which favors hierarchical relations in international order. I conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev, for your comments, not only introducing the book, but again sharing some very important thoughts on nature of BRI and how it has developed during last 9 years plus. I'll now turn to our next speaker, General S.L. Narasimhan.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, let me thank DG, ICWA, and Sanjeev for giving me this opportunity. Ever since I received the book, I travel from Dwarka to office every day in the morning. So every day, 1 hour was spent on reading this book for the last about 17 days. And I am happy to say that I was able to finish it. So there was a good reading, which actually gave me some good, satisfying reading over a period of time. Thank you. Thank the ICWA for the same. The book gives a very good overview of the land-based projects all along the entire world. And the book also covers almost the entire world. I mean, all regions, countries, etc. have been covered. In some regions, they have gone even country-wise and then covered the One Belt One Road initiative. So my own understanding of the One Belt One Road initiative is that it started as a geo-economic project or initiative. Then slowly, the way it was implemented, the way it was started rolling out, made it a geopolitical initiative subsequently. And now, the way it has panned out and the way the countries have reacted to it, now it has become a geostrategic one. So it has slowly evolved from geo-economic to geopolitical to geostrategic kind of an initiative. The book mainly covers the Silk Road economic belt. That is what the thrust of the book seems to be. In some chapters, of course, the projects have been covered. In many chapters, the project details have not been covered, but the general layout of the project initiative in those regions have been covered in that particular section. We talked about funding for the One Belt One Road initiative. Starting from 2019 onwards, you find a downward trend in the investment that China is making. And it also refers to, the reference was made here to the second BRI summit that they had in 2019, where they wanted to moderate the kind of investment that they were making. And that seems to be showing in the physical investment that they are reducing over a period of time. But one interesting fact that many of us probably need to look at, last year, the maximum investment into One Belt One Road initiative went to West Asian region. That is one of the things that we need to look at a little more critically, basically because you find wherever the Americans are generally showing a lack of interest or are trying to pull back, Chinese are very quick to move in there. So this is one area. And if you also take your mind, we talked about GSI here and GDI here. If you take your mind back to Wang Yi's visit to West Asia in March 21, that is where he first proposed a 5-point security initiative in West Asia. And so that if you look at the building blocks of this GSI, which Xi Jinping pronounced in April this year in Poa Forum, you found the building block starting there. Slowly and steadily, wherever he went, he talked about a security initiative or a forum for island nations in the Indian Ocean region. He talked about this slowly and steadily, the security initiative, the building blocks were seen there. And once this GSI was announced in April, thereafter Mr. Wang Yi and Le Yucheng, both of them gave explanatory notes to this. If you look at this, GDI was subsumed into GSI. Okay? And then when they talked about GDI and gave the references to this and explanation to this, BRI was incorporated into that. So the BRI, GDI and GSI seem to be one overall encompassing kind of initiative which China is trying to push. These days, any meeting Wang Yi goes or anybody goes, GSI and GDI are generally mentioned in all the meetings, all the interactions that they have. So this is something which is going to become probably a booster dose to BRI or One Belt One Road initiative, or a new kind of a structure that is going to be coming into this is something that we all need to be watching this. Another interesting factor you will find is you will not find a list of these projects under One Belt One Road initiative at any place. Even if you go to the One Belt One Road website, which Sanjeev has mentioned in this book, you don't get a list of these projects. So it is very difficult for any research person who is doing the research on this to get the details of these projects that are being done in any kind of country. So this is something, and the other part is, in many places, the host country does not list it, but somewhere else in the Chinese website, you will find that as a One Belt One Road project. So the dichotomy is something which is very, very difficult to match for all the research people who are doing this research under this. The other point is the many projects actually predate One Belt One Road initiative announcement, which took place in Nur Sultan Nazarbayev University in 2013. You look at many of the projects that are all predated that particular One Belt One Road initiative, and everything has been generally brought in because of the factor which Ambassador Khan mentioned, that being Xi Jinping's flagship project, everybody in China, anything that China did was brought back into the fold of One Belt One Road initiative. If you take stock of the projects that have gone on, it has come out clearly in the previous remarks that were made, that you get a mixed bag. In some countries, you find some kind of positive note that you get. In some countries, you get a negative report. So you get a mixed bag in almost all the countries where this One Belt One Road initiative has been rolled out. We talked about many other Silk Roads. I think one Silk Road that didn't get mentioned even by Sanjeev in the last epilogue is listed the all other ones. But one thing you missed out is the Space Silk Road. Space Silk Road is something that we need to be looking at very, very carefully and very, very in detail. Basically, because that is where lot of things are happening today, particularly from the Chinese side. So this is something that a project like this cannot be finished in one book like this. That is the problem that you will find when you want to do a book like this. It has been an excellent effort, because to get a book out like this, I know how much time it takes, how much effort it takes. It's very difficult, and it has been a wonderfully done book. But the problem is each one of these will actually worth a book. You look at, say, Digital Silk Road. This is the least studied Silk Road projects in the entire world. Nobody has studied the Digital Silk Road which China has rolled out. It's extremely difficult because many of the contracts are not in the open. You can't even see what they are up to and what they are doing. So, Digital Silk Road, Health Silk Road, Polar Silk Road is another one which is catching up speed now, with the Northern Sea Route coming into importance. And Space Silk Road, of course, is something that we need to be looking at. I think I'm running out of time. I'll just finish in 2 minutes. The linkage of One Belt, One Road to GDI and GSA, I mentioned to you. I'm not going to speak about it more. The counter to this, how do we then deal with this thing which is actually growing in size and shape and everything else? The thing is, none of the counters to this, like in the terms of Build Act, in terms of Build Back Better World, Global Partnership and Infrastructure Investment by the G7, IPEF, none of them have been able to gain traction so far. The only way to go is to put up something which is worth about $400 to $5 billion together. Then you can make a counter to this offer. But that nobody has been able to do it so far. Hopefully, IPEF and all, if they gain traction, we will see it. But I don't see a kind of immediate response to this coming up in any big way. Recently, there is a trend in the One Belt, One Road that we are looking at. Previously, they were not allowing any of the third countries to take part in the One Belt, One Road initiative. Any mention of third country, even by Pakistan, drew a reaction from China immediately. But these days, you find Chinese themselves offering this to other countries to come and take part in this One Belt, One Road initiative. That shows two things. One is that mellowing down which took place post 2019. And second, also the inability of the Chinese to fund all the projects that are actually rolled out. Because when they rolled out, it was supposed to be $1.4 trillion till 2030. But I don't think they're able to meet that kind of commitment. Lastly, the grant versus loans was talked about by Ambassador Kant, 1:9. He made the figure. The thing was, I think when they went and invested initially, at least, almost 61 countries joined hands immediately, and they started investing in about 40 countries. Out of them, almost 40 to 41 countries were either very poor, the economic status was very low, or they have come out of a civil strife, or they had autocratic regime. That are the kind of countries that they actually targeted initially to go in with the BRI. Once they went in, you found that they also knew that many of these countries will not be able to pay the money back to them. So if that is the case, then they were looking at sovereign guarantees or returns in lieu, like what Ambassador Khan mentioned about Hambantota, etc. So, or the resources were taken in lieu of that. The case of Nepal is very interesting. I mean, we talked about Nepal is also being covered in this book, but Nepal is a very interesting situation today. You remember in July, Liu Chenchaw had come with a delegation to Nepal and camped there for some time. And the next delegation was here now recently, was another delegation camping there. Nepal seems to have told the Chinese, if you are giving it in grants, we will take it. No loans we can accept. So therefore, you find a kind of pushback that is happening by the small countries that they are not wanting to take anything on loan. But if you are giving it as a grant and finishing it, we will be able to take it. That is the kind of pushback. One remark was talked about Sri Lanka. But if you speak to many people in Sri Lanka today, many of them do not blame the Chinese. They actually say, my own government has not actually done the due diligence. And they went and did this, and so therefore we are in trouble. So I don't think the criticism of China is very much there in some countries like Sri Lanka and things like that. I'll stop here, and then if there are any questions, we'll take it up later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing those comments on BRI. And General Narasimhan made a number of very important points, but one particular observation I would like to highlight is the fact that how new dimensions are being added to BRI and need for us to study, initiatives like Space BRI, Polar BRI, Health BRI, Digital BRI, and these are all gaining traction. So these are not just ideas, but very well thought out propositions that are being implemented. Thanks for that. I'll now move to our next speaker, Prof. Srikanth Kondapalli.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ashok Kantha. Let me thank the DG ICWA for giving me this opportunity and congratulate the ICWA staff for publishing this voluminous work on the BRI. My home is just about 5 minutes to my office, so I couldn't spend 17 hours that General Narasimhan had spent. But I did read the book. Next time I should shift to Gurgaon so that I can read the next volume from ICW. Yeah, good Dwarka, that's right. Well, the first book published on the BRI in India was USI's book, and there was a Sichuan University delegation which went to USI, and they got together, BK Sharma and another editor. So that was the first volume, but it was kind of compilation of the proceedings that happened. And then one S.K. Sahai published one on the BRI, and then we at JNU published a book. 16 of us got together, and we collected a lot of Chinese material in this. And one of the things we had an advantage was the CNKI, which is like a JSTOR or a ProQuest. So I would recommend the ICWA to procure this database. It's a little bit expensive, but worth it. There's substantial information there. If you want to look at China, CNKI is indispensable. I just cite a few statistics from the CNKI. In 2013, there were just about 5 articles in CNKI on the BRI projects. By 2014, 470 articles were published. I'm saying from the academic perspective, the kind of, by 2015, there were 144 books were published in China by several ministries, think tanks, universities. And the joke is when Xi Jinping or any leader says BRI, then everyone has to write about BRI. You don't get a promotion in any of the think tanks, universities, etc., if you don't follow that diktat. So when Chiang Zemin spoke about 3 represents, everybody was publishing 3 represents. When Hu Jintao spoke about harmonious world, everybody was publishing on harmonious world. So that's the trend. So we got to see what happens in the 20th Party Congress so that we can prepare books in advance. 2015, they had 7,587 articles on BRI in the CNKI. 7,000 articles. 2016, there were 247 books, 100 more books on BRI. And so you can imagine 9,680 articles published in CNKI that year. And of course, the trend went on extensively as the second summit meeting was held in 2017. And basically, when you look at the subjects that were covered, 37% were on economic reform, structural reform, because they were doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. The railway companies were merged together. The one in Changchun and the other closer to Wuhan were all put together, and they made it into a big conglomerate railway company so that they started investing in West Asia. The railway projects, and the Indian rights lost a lot of contracts. RITES, the railway company, a lot of contracts because the Chinese railway company became a 24 billion turnover company, and so they started acquiring a lot of projects across the world and mainly in West Asia. So 37% of all these articles are on how BRI is for economic reform, how it is trying to put across the domestic. And so on industry, there is just about 12% of the articles, and on trade, 9%, transportation, 9%, and the rest are the subjects. Why I'm saying all this is that there were these 5 connectivities when they began with the first white paper issued in 2015, mentioning about 5 connectivities. First is policy coordination. Second is trade promotion. Third is renminbi internationalization. Fourth is connectivity, railway, road, fiber optics, all that connectivity, transportation. And the fifth is people-to-people contacts or tourism or cultural or educational institutions or all that put together. So the first one is policy coordination. The first time the Chinese told us was in February 2014. Dai Pinko came here and spoke to Shiv Shankar Menon. And out of 45 minutes, he spent 1 minute, and that too not on the Continental, but on the MSR. He said, why don't India join the MSR? So the IGNC came out with this Project Mausam, which was kind of botched up program. So far, we have not been really able to invest in this IOR, economic, cultural, commercial linkages, but nevertheless, that is what has happened. So in policy coordination, they were not actually talking to countries. They were just telling you join, and that is it. So the unilateral aspect has been the major thrust area. Trade, in the book, Sanjeev mentioned about roughly about less than a quarter, around a quarter of their trade is with the BRI countries. China has trade 970 billion with the US, 930 billion with EU, and some 320 billion with Japan, 220 billion with South Korea, 900 billion with ASEAN. So all these put together, nearly 3 to 4 trillion. That's 40 to 50% of the entire trade. So BRI trade promotion has not happened actually, and now with Ukrainian war and the situation in Eurasia, everything is down. Because the core area, as they mentioned before, was actually in Central Asia, Russia. But when we actually look at the investment, it is West Asia, which got, I agree with General Narasimhan on this. 50% of the articles are on West Asia. And Southeast Asia, 38% of the articles. And India, 36% of articles, although we didn't join the BRI. By the way, Manmohan Singh and Li Keqiang signed an agreement in 2013, which included BCIM, which is part of the BRI. So we have technically been part of the BRI, at least a portion of the BRI, when the joint statement mentions about the BCIM. Of course, in the BRI, they mentioned BCIM EC, Economic Corridor, as the technical name. And in the second summit meeting, they just pulled out the map, which included BCIM EC, because somebody protested from the Indian side probably. And so that has been the reason why I'm suggesting is that all this is that there is a lot of debate within China on these, and we can broadly see 3-4 schools of thought that came up. One is that BRI is an opportunity for everyone because the IMF, World Bank have failed in providing for public goods and services in terms of investments, infrastructure projects. This happened with the PIGS countries, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Spain, taking a lot of IMF investments, World Bank investments. They were not able to really cater for the Asian, African, or other infrastructure projects. And then now China moves in with these projects. And so there is an opportunity here. So Henry Kissinger, Yan Shuetong, Wang Yiwei, which was referred to, Wang Yiwei wrote 3 books on the BRI, and he's been very vocal on that. Huang Renwei from Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, Luo Yize from CAS, Po Truye from Singapore, and with the military intelligence. He also works with the military intelligence. So a lot of these said about BRI being an opportunity. But there are also others who started saying BRI is actually a challenge. So one of the brand names here is Brahmachalani, whose debt trap diplomacy became quite popular. Everybody started mentioning about debt trap. It comes from him, and he wrote an article which becomes so at least one Indian contributed to a discourse on BRI substantially on that. There were Ashley Tellis, Paul Dave, Albright, so many other scholars have questioned the BRI projects. But the Chinese were also packaging this as uh, uh, China's contribution to the world. So this is a new theory that many in CAS, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, promoted. Because when the Americans rose in 1945, they have something to contribute to the human evolution through the Silicon Valley. Of course, it came only recently, but space, nuclear, transportation, those were the iconic projects the Americans have pushed. So the debate in China is, what is your contribution? You're rising, you've become second largest economy. What's your contribution? You can't say that we invented gunpowder, we invented this, we invented those for sutta farming, as they used to say. You can't bank on your laurels, ancient Chinese laurels, but you have to show something. So Chinese started packaging this as Chinese contribution, BRI as a contribution. There is also the other, which is China threat theory, which became quite popular outside. Brahmachalani again is one major figure there. So China threat theory as a very popular one outside China, obviously, and that is to be met with this Build Back Better World, the AAGC, Asia Africa Growth Corridor, the G7 extended programs, European Union sustainable development projects, Shinzo Abe's quality infrastructure. These were all alternatives which are proposed for the BRI, and nothing, of course, really happened on that front. So let me just summarize by saying the book had packaged all of these. Of course, these are Polar Silk Road, Health Silk Road. These are all evolving, Digital Silk Road. And there are reverses as well. Huawei 5G has been rejected by the US, by many European countries, UK, for instance, or Germany, which is rejecting. So there is a problem with the digital Silk Road. Space, there is a discussion in Geneva on the outer space weaponization and other things. So this is a work in progress. So I think it's quite comprehensive. The book is quite comprehensive. Let me again congratulate the team for since February till October. That's quite a record time. And when you have in-house expertise, 15, 20 researchers working on this, and once the direction is provided, I think that makes it the miracles. You have quite a comprehensive work here. Congratulations.
Thank you, Srikanth. And we all share your assessment that it's a comprehensive work. And term use miracle. That's also welcome. I think some points you made about coverage of BRI, in CMKI data. That's really remarkable. And I was reminded of the fact that how BRI or OBOR at that time became a catch-all construct. So everything was put under basket of OBOR. In fact, Chinese business leaders tried very hard to persuade us that please give some kind of support because it will become easier for us to pursue projects in India because loans will be more forthcoming in case of OBOR project. Just one comment on BCIM. They had included BCIM as part of OBOR in 2015 also. At first, Belt and Road Forum also they included. Every time we told them that doing so is kiss of death for BCIM. if you want to kill BCIM, please include it as part of BRI, because that's the surest way of ensuring that India will not go ahead with BCIM. In any case, BCIM has died its own death out of old age or whatever reason, I don't know. Now let's move to Professor Sriram Chaulia.
Thank you, Ambassador Kantha. Firstly, congratulations to DG ICWA and editor Sanjeev. Really, it's actually a global survey, and you don't get to cover so many countries, so many regions in a single volume like this. It's very rare, and it's a bit of a tome, but worth reading. 330 pages or so. So definitely worth reading, especially for I see some students in the audience, and I hope there's a lot of general knowledge out there about the workings of a great power using economic statecraft on a grand global stage. The scope is audacious, of the book, as much as the BRI is audacious, 150 countries or so, and I think they have covered every region, sub-region and country. So empirically, it's very strong. That's the point. You can really learn a lot about what's going on. And the good thing about the book is it's got a balance of supply side and demand side considerations of this grand project. What I mean by that is, what is the Chinese intent and strategic motivation in each region, in each country? Why they are pumping in the loans and the investments? And what is the perception from the ground up in the recipient countries? So there's a good balance of the supply side and demand side of these financial flows. I think that's important because sometimes sinologists would focus more on the supply side, the givers, and less so on the different regions and sub-regions of the world. So I think that's a good balance you have struck. So this I would recommend not just to the hardcore sinophiles, but also to anyone who is interested in world affairs in general. Because that way, if you're an Africanist, there's enough meat in here. If you're a Latin Americanist, there is enough content in here, and so on. If you're a Central Asianist, there's enough here. What I would have hoped, and maybe this is room for improvement into the future, is there is relatively lack of theoretical judgment in the book. As in, it reads more like a compendium than a work with a core argument. And of course, edited volumes, it's hard to have a core argument because the editor only has the introduction and the conclusion. But there also, I would have liked to see more judgment. So what it's kind of open-ended, and it's not really calling a spade a spade. There are many chapters where on the demand side, I mean the recipient countries, you have instances where people are calling it a neo-colonial project or the critique. The critique is pretty well developed, by the way. Every chapter has a strong critique. So the concerns and contradictions are pretty well laid out. But what I mean is, on the basis of all these critiques, and 10 years is enough time for us to pass an informed judgment, why not just call it neo-colonialism? I mean, the activists on the ground are calling it. The ones who oppose these the Chinese interventions are calling it neo-colonial. But why don't we call it? And is this an Indian trait that we are just cagey about making a strong judgment? And the Chinese in the so-called Marxism, Leninism, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, right? Now, when we say it's overcapacity as a driving factor in manufacturing, in engineering, in construction materials, and all these things, when we say the impetus, the domestic impetus, one of the main ones is overcapacity. That is a classic in their own ideological prism. It's the advent of and the other side is the need for raw materials and energy and resources, which is why they are going out in a big way all over. I think this fits into even the Marxist-Leninist definition of neo-colonialism. Imperialism as the highest stage of state-guided capitalism. And associated with that, we could have made a judgment on the basis of BRI. If BRI is a definitive foreign policy initiative of China, the concept of the century or whatever it is for achieving their say centennial goals and all these things, what kind of a great power is China? I think that's something, if we had seen more of it, some judgment, a value judgment, I think it could have been stronger. Second point related to this is the whole infrastructure centered. This is at the end of the day, whether it's digital or physical, the BRI is all about infrastructure, right? So this gigantism, as Schumacher used to call it, and infrastructure based, all the propaganda they've done about this being economic game changer for so many developing countries around the world, in Asia, in Africa, the Middle East, so I think, and the figures have been quoted. There is a $40 trillion infrastructure financing deficit in the developing world, and China seems to be coming in and filling that gap, which is not being provided by others. It's the only game in town. Well, what kind of infrastructure do these countries need? And what kind of power structures are already in place there, and how are they making the judgment that these will be economic game changers? That's something more granular, and which of course comes from the critique at the grassroots level in many of these recipient countries about what the Chinese are doing in their respective countries and regions. So that dehumanizing aspect of the infrastructure investment that the Chinese have been doing, or pushing down the throats of countries through predatory lending and also corruption, the bribery of elites in these countries. This is something, that needs to come out more, and we need to question. Well, the Japanese have done it with their alternative concept of quality infrastructure, and that's well covered in the book. But what kind of infrastructure do many of these countries need? Because it's not a one size fits all, right? There are some that may actually benefit and may actually need large ports and railroads and bridges and highways and tunnels. And there are some where these were pure white elephants and have just laden them with debt. So I think we have to develop a strong critique of this fetish or obsession for infrastructure and giant infrastructure. And it's unlikely that all these 150 countries with whom MOUs have been signed need this infrastructure. And that's why I think we need to unbundle and unpack these concepts, like there is a $40 trillion infrastructure deficit, which China is coming as the white knight, as a savior. So I'll just stop by saying that we need more critical judgments, and I hope that we'll be able to generate those and create a central argument when we write these kind of books, so that it also conveys an Indian viewpoint. I mean, I'm pretty happy with the empirical work. I'm just thinking, if a reader in Chile and Latin America, by the way, the chapter shows that Latin America, in general, overall, the benefits of BRI have overweighed the costs as per their needs in the Western Hemisphere. Now, in general, if there is someone sitting in Chile or Peru, or someone sitting in Egypt and reading this, and I'm sure through our network we'll promote, what is the Indian view on BRI? That's not come out as well as it should have. It's a great compilation, great compendium, but I hope that we can generate more such. So if you had substantiated it more with a strong subjective line, throughout, I think that will be more valuable, because then the resistance that we ourselves are part of becomes more clear and unambiguous. Yeah? Otherwise, it's great, and I strongly recommend. I learned a lot actually I didn't even know about the depth of the projects and the programs they're doing, and just the scale, the enormity of this. But I just kept going back to the idea that when was the last time something so audacious was ever attempted? The Marshall Plan was only for Europe, and that too for reconstruction for a limited duration after 1945. So this is a kind of the Marxists themselves had the critique of neo-colonialism or neo-imperialism on this scale, it's never been attempted. And of course, we are right to say that some of these are exaggerated and some of these are overvalued. It may not be 1 trillion what they've already spent. But the point is just the scale of this suggests that it is a kind of instrument of grand strategy and of statecraft. And whether it may be repackaging of old projects and loans and all, that's fine. But still, the way they've been able to market it, and the way they come up with these newer and newer acronyms, GDI, GSI, BRI, and I'm sure whenever there's a leadership transition, I don't know, Srikanth knows this better, maybe not in our lifetimes or what, I don't know, but whenever there is one, there will be a new concept, right? So they are doing it with a kind of a clear domination agenda. And I think that as a counter hegemonic narrative, India, which stands for the downtrodden and for the weak countries, and we stand for global south, it should become part of our counter hegemonic narrative, these kind of books. It already is. I don't think any of people have read such a strong, empirical account of, especially with more of the contradictions and concerns. But I think a little bit more of a theoretical rigor and value judgment would have made this perfect. But I will still give it an A, with A plus being the highest grade. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chaulia, for your comments, your grading, and most importantly, for pointing out some areas which need to be explored further. Vijay, I'll dispense with my concluding remarks as chair. Can we take a few minutes for Q&A? Okay, good then. Yeah, please go ahead. What we'll do, we will club 3-4 questions, and you should address your question to one of the panelists.
My question is to Narasimhan sir. So during your remarks, I couldn't help but notice that you refer to this project as OBOR. I think if, for example, there were 50 times that you mentioned it, at least 40 times you called it OBOR. My question is why? And linked to that is, why did China change the name from OBOR to BRI? Technicalities matter for the Chinese. And it was done very early on, not even when there was this sort of pushback as we see now. So what was China's reason, and what is your reason for calling it OBOR?
Next question. Please go ahead. Yeah.
How do you see the BRI project and its growing project, some economic and security implication the Caribbean and Latin American country?
Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is, whenever a country of China's stature and a global power goes for such a huge, ambitious enterprise, and in its historical trajectory, they always have some historical logic to it. They always have some philosophy, some theory, or something in them that they want to convey or transmit to the world. And knowing that is also important, and I don't find that in many of the literature that issue is being addressed or being discussed. I will just give one suggestion. I have read few articles. I am doing research on BRI since last 3 years, though I have not read the book, so I am not qualified to ask question on the book. But by my background of being with this topics in last 3 years, I have read something about Tianjia. And there is, in the Chinese universities, there is a big movement, and they are trying to theorize what China is going to do with all the power, wealth, economic progress they have. So has this is being contemplated to be addressed anywhere in the book, or anybody like to throw light on it? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Narasimhan, sir. So, BRI is an ambitious project. We have discussed that in VAST here. But the current funding constraints that you spoke of, the global economic slowdown, which has its impact on some of the developing countries as well, which were part of the BRI initiative. So, in that context, my question is how sustainable do you see is its growth in the near future? Thank you.
I actually have a question for Sanjeev, and it's on how has China's self-perception changed from the start of BRI to the point of the publication of the book, and how does it reflect in the book? I have not read the book, but I thought I'll flag this question on anyway.
First round of responses, then we can come back to required. Yeah. Go ahead, Srikanth.
I wanted to reply also to Shriparna's. I attended a conference with Fu Ying, Ambassador Fu Ying. Those of you who know her, she was the NPC, National People's Congress Foreign Affairs spokesperson. So I asked her why you have changed from OBOR to BRI. So she stood up and she had a belt. So she started showing me the belt and said, "This is the belt and this is the road." Just as an aside. Huang Qing was also there at the time, from Singapore. So they didn't had a clue how to package this, basically. There was a lot of disjuncture in the thought processes when they initiated the OBOR and then transited. Because many of the OBOR, as General Narasimhan mentioned, it was also part of the Western Development Campaign of the 9th Five-Year Plan. And we are now in the 14th Five-Year Plan in China. So all those projects have been clubbed up with the 11th Five-Year Plan, and everything is mixed up. And for example, many of the projects in Bangladesh are also now, which were started way back and now are putting across as part of the BRI. Budh Gandak project, again in Nepal, that was started some 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, during Dioba's government and then Oli's government, and all sorts of governments have changed in Nepal. But then they are all packaged again in the BRI projects or OBOR projects. So there is a lot of disjuncture here, and so that is. But the question that was asked for me was on CELAC, the Central Latin American and Central Asian, Central South American, the CELAC grouping. Much of the investment is in Brazil, and also in Mexico, Peru. But the Amazon project related to the high-speed railway, they wanted to cut short the whole thing and reach the East Coast on the South American continent. That has been rejected. Mexico also rejected a railway project, passing through again many of those. And the metro project in Mexico City, that has also been rejected because of a local opposition. But I wanted to connect this to the larger issue. Pompeo once mentioned to the Nepalese foreign minister, if you don't need this project, don't go for this project. So he was mentioning about the $56 billion Lhasa to Kathmandu railway line, because Nepal's GDP is $20 billion, around $20 billion. And you pay $56 billion, these guys will never be able to pay back. And probably Kathmandu will become another Hambantota or whatever the case is. So Americans advise the Nepalese that don't take money which you don't require. If it is not very urgent, these projects are not very urgent because these are capital-intensive projects, technology-intensive as well. So that was the thing that was mentioned. And of course, the Americans have given $500 million for Nepal. And so that is the reason why you have a lot of differentiation. Within South America, the Chinese objective was to basically challenge the Monroe Doctrine. They want to also invest in projects which would be of dual use military civilian projects. For example, in the CBERS, China Brazil Earth Observation Satellite projects, they have a number of these things which are dual use in nature. Spying on the southern portion of America, the United States, and a host of other things. So one is to marginalize. Marginalize is a very strong word, but marginalize in terms of trade and other aspects. And you now see China is the second largest trading partner for the CELAC countries. And in terms of investment as well, they are now, European Union is less, third or fourth, while China is the largest investor in all soybean projects, the iron ore, imports, infrastructure projects in the South American continent. So, but then there is also the opposition. The Mexican rejection of the railway project was very, it was taken in China in a very strong manner because it was completely rejected. So there was also consensus, bipartisan consensus within Mexican politics on that project. So it became really controversial for the Chinese on that.
To your question, there are three reasons. One, if you take your mind back to peaceful rise of China, when the world started questioning what is this peaceful rise all about, they quietly changed to peaceful development. So here, One Belt, One Road was being questioned as whose belt and whose road and where is it going. They simply changed it to BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. Look at the website. Even today it says Ita Ilu, which means one belt and one road. So that's why I maintain that it is a one belt, one road and is nothing else. So these are three reasons for it. The second question is on the Caribbean. I am sure he has answered it. Logic of the one belt, one road, TNCR, the question that you asked, sir. See, initially it simply planned out as an economic kind of a initiative. Slowly now, as I explained, it's being built into BDI, the GDI, and then the GSI. And they are trying to create, and in the GSI's explanation, it has been said, they are looking at creating an alternative security structure in the world. So it is an alternative structure that they are looking at. So to that extent, I don't think TNCR is the thing that they are looking at. What they are looking at is an enlarged kind of an influence for the Chinese in terms of GDI and GSI is something that is being built into it. On the sustenance of BRI question, I have my doubts about how they'll sustain this because they have realized that this kind of lending that they were doing in the initial stages of the One Belt, One Road initiative is not sustainable. So that is the reason you find the investments into this initiative is slowly reducing. And now they are wanting third country players to come into this, to pitch into it. And again, as he mentioned, as the chair mentioned, the loans versus grants is a big issue. Now the countries are actually looking for more grants than the loans. So you find this is not going away, definitely, but sustaining this, the growth rate of this is going to be rather slow. Self-perception of China, I think I leave it to Sanjeev to respond to that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think when the project was initiated, there were four areas in which worked as a drivers or on which I think China thought it's important from the perspective of BRI. The number one was, of course, economic. China wanted to create new markets and also for its surplus economy in traditional sectors. So BRI was important from economic perspective. And then from geopolitical, I think if we read the literature in 2020, just before the BRI was launched in 2012 or 2011, experts like Wang Chixi was writing about move to March West. And he was giving a geopolitical justification why China should move to marchwards. I'm not saying that what BRI was adopted. I think people have written that it might be influenced by what Wang Qixi suggested that time. So that was a geopolitical ambition to give the focus to the western border. Third is a maritime sector. I think in 18th Party Congress, we know that the China highlighted to become a maritime power in 2012, and BRI was also seen to be one of the means to get that aim. And finally, about the energy, we have a very interesting study by Chinese Academy of Social Sciences of the relevant department, studying how BRI could help China becoming the energy destination and the neighboring country as a energy supplier. So on all these four sectors, I find that, of course, geopolitical has now dominated the whole four, if we analyze one by one. But here I would like to mention the Second Belt and Forum. It has already been discussed. I think that was the time when they realized that there are genuine grievances and backlash in various regions, and they need to accommodate some of the grievances. And yeah, I will conclude here. I may interact with you later on the subject. Thank you.
I think Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia wanted to make some comments.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, DG, for inviting me here today. Naturally, I speak not as a China scholar, but as someone who's deeply interested in China. And I really have four points to make so that there's a continuity of the institutional thinking and role that can be brought out here. There are still a few people left in this room who were there when I was in charge of this institution between 2012 and 2015. So from around the time when Xi Jinping took over, this room has witnessed numerous in-depth deliberations involving all kinds of people, all kinds of stakeholders. And I remember in particular the 50th anniversary of 1962 war, when we had real Maharathis on China who were present here. The center point that came through very clearly was that the deep psychological wound on India's consciousness has not gone away. And this was before Galwan. The point I'm making is that after Galwan, it has become even more difficult for a scholar in India to write objectively on China. And it is even more difficult for a China scholar of Indian origin to write about China in an objective manner. I think this is the point which needs to be made here. So during that period, 2013, 2014, every Chinese delegation we received, regardless of the agenda, would only insist on talking about BRI. Whatever may be the subject, they'll speak for 2-3 minutes and then they go on to BRI. I also remember that early 2015, I think it was before Sushma Swaraj's visit, you were still in Beijing. There was a big conference in Kunming to sell BRI to us. And I led a delegation from ICWA of China scholars to see as to what is happening there. We were given the position of primacy there because we were going to be the major potential customer. If they could sell it to India, the task would have been much easier for them. And I knew that at that time, South Bloc had not made up its mind. Or maybe it had made up its mind, but it was very clear that we would reveal it slowly as to what that mind was. So clearly, our approach was to be very ambivalent, to be open-minded, be sort of friendly, but make it clear that we are not buying it. And believe me, I mean, without naming names, I remember a very startling moment when one of the members of our delegation, these were not officials, these were scholars, one of them went out of his way to say what a great idea BRI is, and India is fully supportive of BRI, and that, this is the greatest act of Chinese friendship that China can show towards India to accept us in BRI. It was one of the most embarrassing moments for us to be there, because next day when I took the floor and I spoke in very different terms, as I pointed out. My next point is that as a researcher in the last 3 years, researching my book on Africa, I must say something that will startle particularly Professor Chaulia, because we have been so deeply colored by what we read every day in the morning in the new newspapers and what we see on the television in the evening before we sleep. We have a very clear idea that there's not a single thing China can do right. And therefore, all this is reflected in our writings and our pronouncements. And that's why I said it's very difficult for an Indian diplomat, a scholar, professor to be objective on China. So when I consulted the African scholars and African diplomats and African leaders, it is true that many of them are critical of China. But the fact is that many of them have been very supportive of BRI and Chinese policy. And one point that they make is totally without any counter. And that point is that it is because of China's BRI that the entire world was forced to take so much interest in Africa. So this is a point that you cannot dispute if you're trying to be objective. So the central point I'm making basically here is that Chinese have done a lot of wrong things, but they have done some good things. And the basic fact is that the West, despite all these loud sounding concepts, they haven't delivered anything that is anything close to the counter to BRI. This is a fact that we will have to reflect very deeply. Thank you very much for giving me the chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you made a very important point that we need to take note of, some positive aspects of BRI also, and we should not be sort of non-objective or negative in our approach. Finally, Sriram, would like to add anything? Yeah.
No, sir. I think, look, Ambassador Bardia, we have only 3 China scholars. We don't have 20 like Jane. No, the only thing I would say is that I think, you see, intellectual, the amount of investment China has done in propaganda and in buying minds in the developing world, also because the kind of sponsorships and junkets and all these things they offer can color viewpoints. Actually, one has to go to the level of trade unions. One has to go to the level of peasants. One has to go to the level of industrial workers who are laid off. One has to go to the level of people who are displaced due to these gigantic projects. I think the realities in many the LDCs and small island developing nations and all these is at the full grassroots, and we are probably don't even have access to that level of average opinion. So I think it's still an open judgment as to what benefits people are getting out of this. I mean, there is an elite consensus in Africa and elsewhere that it's good for us because there's nobody else. The Westerners are nowhere, and nobody else has the money. But then I think the notion of development in many of these countries itself requires a deeper deconstruction and critique. Only then will we get a genuine, understanding of the, ill effects of what China is doing, and that's my view. Thank you.
I think Vijay. Yeah. Well, I will not take more time, so I'll dispense with concluding remarks. We are well behind schedule. Just one point I wanted to make that every good deed is punished. So you get punishment for that. So for writing a good book, for putting together a good book, I think you'll have to write more books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's my pleasure to propose a vote of thanks. We all have certainly benefited from today's rich deliberations. I would like to sincerely thank the chair, Ambassador Ashok Kantha, And the panelists, Lieutenant General S.L. Narasimhan, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, and Professor Sreeram Chaulia for their insightful observations and analysis. We also express our gratitude to our colleagues from OP Jindal University, Delhi University, CAPS, India Foundation, and MEA who have joined today's event. Finally, I would like to thank the leadership of ICWA for their guidance and support. Now, all participants are cordially invited for high tea in the fire. Thank you.
Thank you so much.